You have a job and perhaps a career, yet money isn't enough. You barely afford basic necessities, can't even think of holidays or a new car. You look across the ocean to the United States and see people who may be overworked like you, but at least they've got a full stash compared to your pockets. You look over to Europe and see the Italians, the Spaniards, and even the Greeks who live comfortably, even if they're not necessarily rich. Both Americans and Europeans from the continent have better lives than you, and sadly, you don't live in a third world country. You live in Britain, in the so-called middle class. And that's the reality of 2025. 20 years ago, a factory worker could buy a house on a single salary. A retail manager could afford to live near the shop where they worked. An IT technician could support a family whilst their partner stayed home with the kids. The Office for National Statistics data reveals real regular pay growth hit only 1.2% in May to July 2025, after years of stagnation and decline through the 2010s. UK productivity growth since the financial crisis averaged just 0.6% annually according to parliamentary research, compared to 2.2% in the decades before 2008. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation calculated that a single person needs £29,500 annually for a basic, decent life in 2025. A couple with 2 children need £50,000. So when your work barely covers survival, when saving becomes impossible, when home ownership slips further away each year, what do? Do you accept this as a new norm? Or do you start looking at those ferry tickets to France? Everything begins with productivity, the value each hour of work creates. The Office for National Statistics document the UK's productivity disaster comprehensively. Since 2009, productivity growth averaged roughly 0.6% per year compared to 2.2% in the 1971 to 2007 era. British firms invest less than competitors according to ONS data. UK business investment remains below pre-pandemic levels even in 2025. When warehouse workers lack modern equipment, when retail staff operate outdated systems, when call center employees use ancient software, they cannot compete with better equipped workers elsewhere. Distribution centers replace factories across the Midlands and the North, but these jobs pay half what manufacturing once did. Amazon warehouses track workers every second, measuring productivity by the minute, yet pay barely above minimum wage. Sports Direct depots time toilet breaks. The work exists, but at rates that don't support decent living. Zero-hour contracts cover over 1 million workers, about 3 to 3.5% of the workforce. These arrangements concentrate in hospitality, retail, care work, and logistics. Workers don't know next week's hours, can't secure rental contracts with unpredictable income, and have no sick pay or holiday rights. October 2022 brought inflation of 11.1%, the highest in over 40 years according to ONS data. Food prices jumped even worse at 19.1% by March 2023. Though inflation cooled to 3.8% by August 2025, prices remained structurally higher while wages barely moved. Energy costs exemplify the crisis. Ofgem's price cap sits at £1,720 for July to September 2025, rising to £1,755 for October to December. Food inflation hit especially hard. The Food Foundation tracked how prices for basics like bread, milk, and eggs surged. When Ukrainian grain exports fell 24% in 2023 to 2024, wheat prices spiked. Britain imports nearly half its food, making households vulnerable to every global shock. Regular pay rose 5.6% year-on-year according to late 2024 data, but prices had risen faster than wages for 2 straight years. The compound effect leaves workers permanently poorer despite nominal wage increases. How did politicians respond to this crisis? With promises and platitudes whilst their own salaries remained protected from inflation by automatic uprating. MPs saw their pay rise to £91,346 whilst telling workers to show wage restraint. Housing costs dominate household budgets like never before. The Office for National Statistics shows the median home in England and Wales cost 7.7 times median earnings in 2024. While slightly improved from pandemic peaks, affordability remains at crisis levels. Private rental prices rose 8.7% year-on-year in January 2025, according to the ONS Private Rental Prices Index. London rents consume over half of median income. Northern cities that once offered affordable alternatives now take 30 to 40% of earnings. The traditional guideline of spending 1/3 of income on housing seems like ancient history. The Centre for Cities estimates Britain lacks 4.3 million homes that would exist if post-war construction rates had continued. The government pledged 1.5 million new homes this parliament and announced planning reforms including grey belt development and intervention when local plans stall. But UK finance data shows construction starts remain weak. The Office for Budget Responsibility analysed land value uplifts when planning permission gets granted. Agricultural land worth £10,000 per acre jumps to over £1 million with residential permission. A 100-fold increase showing artificial scarcity. These costs transfer directly to buyers and renters. Who benefits from the system? Landowners who happen to get planning permission win the lottery, whilst everyone else pays the price. Local councils approve development where campaign donors have interests, whilst needed social housing gets blocked. The average first-time buyer now reaches 33 years old, up from 25 in the 1960s. Saving a deposit while paying current rents proves mathematically impossible for most workers. Many will rent forever, transferring wealth to landlords rather than building equity. When a system keeps you renting forever, when home ownership becomes hereditary rather than earned, are you really living in a meritocracy? Or have we reached feudalism with modern packaging? The government cut employee national insurance from 10% to 8% on earnings between £12,571 and £50,270 in March 2024. Yet frozen tax thresholds create fiscal drag that more than offsets this reduction. The personal allowance remains frozen at £12,570 since 2021. As wages rise with inflation, millions get pulled into higher tax brackets without any vote to raise rates. Graduates face additional burdens. Plan 2 student loan holders repay 9% of income above £28,470 from 2025 to 2026. The high-income child benefit charge creates more complexity. The threshold increased to £60,000 with the taper extended to £80,000 from April 2024, improving on the previous £50,000 to £60,000 cliff edge. But families still face bizarre incentives where earning more means keeping less. Council tax adds another burden. Based on 1991 property valuations in England and Scotland, the system bears no relation to current values or ability to pay. The UK's overall tax wedge for average single workers runs 29 to 31% according to OECD data. Over 1 million workers operate on zero-hour contracts according to the House of Commons library data. Use increased since the mid-2010s, concentrating in sectors employing millions: hospitality, retail, care, and logistics. Delivery drivers work 6 days weekly yet visit food banks monthly. The Trussell Trust distributed 3.1 million emergency food parcels in 2023 to 2024. 2 million food bank visits occurred in a single month. Warehouse workers, shop assistants, and care workers queue alongside the unemployed because wages won't stretch to month end. The busiest food bank period comes during summer holidays, when term-time workers lose income for 6 weeks. Teaching assistants and dinner ladies save all year just to survive summer without wages. The Lancaster University Work Foundation research reveals the broader insecurity crisis. 6.8 million people work in severely insecure conditions. Warehouse workers can't secure rental contracts without guaranteed hours. Care workers juggle 3 employers, doing 60-hour weeks while still qualifying for universal credit. Call center staff get dismissed by text message. Gig economy platforms perfected exploitation through classification games. Drivers count to self-employed entrepreneurs who can't set prices. Cleaners become small business owners who must wear company uniforms and follow strict protocols. The pretense of self-employment strips away employment rights while maintaining corporate control. Universal credit promised to make work pay but created new traps. Earn an extra £1 and lose 63 pence in withdrawn benefits for some households. Take overtime to cover bills and wait weeks for the system to adjust while debts accumulate. The government froze health and disability elements in spring 2025. For workers managing chronic conditions or disabilities, support shrinks monthly against inflation. Those least able to increase earnings face the deepest cuts. The system punishes progression. Accept promotion and potentially end up worse off after benefit withdrawal. Work extra shifts and face weekends of bureaucratic adjustment. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation documented how work incentives collapse at multiple income points. Child costs compound the trap. Despite expanded free hours, Quorum's 2025 survey reveals persistent gaps. Regional variation means some areas lack places entirely. Parents calculate that after childcare, commuting, and benefit withdrawal, working generates no net income. Second earners, usually women, drop out of the workforce because working costs more than staying home. Brexit cut trade intensity by 15% according to official estimates. Import costs rose just as global inflation struck. Britain imports nearly half of its food, exposing every household to international price shocks. When Ukrainian grain exports fell 24% in 23 to 24, British bread prices surged. The promises of cheaper food and more prosperity met the reality of trade friction and reduced opportunities. Financial services survived but didn't help former manufacturing workers in Sunderland or Stoke. Politicians promised £350 million weekly for the NHS, control of borders, and economic renaissance. Instead, trade barriers rose, investment fell, and that bus slogan became monument to political deception. Where did that money go? Why did the same politicians who promised prosperity now blame global factors for problems they helped create? The Office for National Statistics migration data shows 948,000 long-term immigrants and 517,000 emigrants in year ending December 2024. Net migration fell sharply compared to 2023. Some British workers emigrate seeking better opportunities in Spain, Australia, or elsewhere. The fishing industry, promised liberation from EU quotas, faces new bureaucracy and reduced market access. Coastal communities that backed Brexit for economic revival got neither fish nor prosperity. The symbolism matters as much as the economics. Broken promises erode trust in solutions. Energy dependency amplified every crisis. When Russia invaded Ukraine, British bills exploded because decades of underinvestments left no resilience. North Sea production declined without replacement capacity. Renewed investment lagged, storage facilities closed. The government's energy cap of £1,720 for July to September 2025 sits far above pre-crisis norms. Every geopolitical tremor sends costs higher. Households budget knowing that next winter could bring another price shock. Manufacturing competitiveness collapsed as energy costs exceeded European rivals. Energy-intensive industries relocated or closed. The jobs that remained paid less because employers faced higher operating costs. Workers bore the burden through lower wages and fewer opportunities. Different age groups face distinct but interconnected crises. Young workers start careers with £45,000 average student debt. They pay elevated rents, consuming over half their income. House prices at nearly 8 times earnings locks them out of ownership. Pension provisions shifted from guaranteed benefits to market risk. The average first-time buyer age rose from 25 in the 1960s to 33 today. Many will never buy, condemned to lifetime renting. The Bank of Mum and Dad became Britain's 9th largest mortgage lender because parental help became essential, not optional. If you're under 35, watching your peers in Berlin or Barcelona buying flats whilst you struggle to save anything, doesn't emigration start looking rational? When inheritance determines housing more than income, why stay in a system rigged against you? Older workers approach retirement realizing their preparations prove insufficient. Company pension schemes change repeatedly, always becoming less generous. The state pension age rose to 67 and continues climbing. Energy bills hit pensioners hardest since they're home all day. Private pension pots decimated by market volatility won't fund 20 or 30-year retirements. Middle-aged workers support both children and parents whilst their own security evaporates. They can't afford the lifestyle their parents enjoyed on similar jobs. Private school fees became unaffordable. Foreign holidays gave way to camping in Wales. The middle-class dream shrank to middle-class survival. The productivity statistics from ONS and parliamentary research reveal systematic failure. Investment in equipment, training, and innovation collapsed after 2008 and never recovered. British workers operate with less capital per hour than German, American, or Korean counterparts. Management quality lags according to academic studies. Family firms resist modern practices. Small companies lack resources for improvement. Large corporations focus on financial engineering rather than operational excellence. British workers produce less value per hour through no fault of their own. Research and development spending as GDP percentage trails competitors. South Korean firms spend twice as much per worker. German companies provide 50% more vocational training. British workers have equal capability but systematic under-equipment and under-training. Regional disparities compound the problem. London and the South East capture most investment whilst former industrial regions starve for capital. The levelling up agenda promised rebalancing but delivered marginal changes. Places that once led global innovation now struggle to maintain basic services. Meanwhile, HS2 costs ballooned from £33 billion to over £100 billion, enriching consultants and contractors whilst delivering less than originally promised. How many hospitals, schools, or council homes could that money have built? Who decided a faster train to Birmingham mattered more than affordable housing? OECD data reveals Britain's relative decline. The tax wedge seems reasonable at 29 to 31% versus 35% OECD average, but other costs tell different stories. Sweden's tax wedge reaches 41 to 42%, higher than Britain's. Yet Swedish workers enjoy universal childcare, comprehensive healthcare, generous parental leave, and subsidized housing. Municipal income tax averaging 32.4% funds services that British workers buy privately. Swedish property fees cap at around £750 annually, far below British council tax. German workers earn more with stronger protection and better pensions. French families receive proper childcare support, reducing private costs. Even America, despite its problems, offers higher wages for many professions. The UK chose high private costs with modest public services, combining the worst aspects of different systems. The Institute for Fiscal Studies chronicled how UK living standards lagged peer nations through the 2010s and early 2020s. GDP per capita rankings show Britain falling behind. The economic pie grew more slowly here while slices became less equal. So here's the question keeping young Britons awake. If you could earn more in Munich, pay less for housing in Madrid, or enjoy better services in Stockholm, what exactly is keeping you here? Nostalgia? Family? Or just the inertia of staying put whilst your quality of life erodes yearly? Solutions exist but require fundamental changes exceeding current political will. The Office for Budget Responsibility analysed potential gains from planning reform. Building millions of homes where jobs exist would reduce housing costs within a decade. Infrastructure investment must support housing expansion. Transport, schools, and utilities need coordination with development. Local authorities must benefit fiscally from growth rather than bearing costs without rewards. The current system incentivizes opposition because development brings problems without benefits. Tax reform cannot be avoided indefinitely. The Institute for Fiscal Studies and Resolution Foundation shows the council tax system needs complete overhaul. Property wealth must contribute fairly. Work shouldn't bear a disproportionate burden. Reform creates winners and losers, guaranteeing fierce resistance. But who loses from reform? The same groups who benefit from current dysfunction. Landowners sitting on development sites, landlords extracting maximum rents, corporations paying poverty wages knowing benefits will supplement them. The system works perfectly for those with capital and connections. Why would they want change? Productivity improvement requires patient capital and long-term thinking. Skills training, management development, technology adoption all need sustained investment. The private sector won't deliver alone. Public investment must lead. Treasury rules prioritize deficit reduction over growth investment. Worker security needs strengthening without destroying flexibility. Zero-hour contracts should be limited to genuine business needs. Sick pay and holiday pay rights should be universal. Collective bargaining should be encouraged where power imbalances exist. The current race to the bottom serves nobody's long-term interests. The data tells an undeniable story. Work no longer provides decent living standards for millions of Britons. Real wages stagnate whilst housing, energy, and food costs surge. Insecure employment spreads whilst worker power collapses. The tax system extracts more through stealth whilst public services deteriorate. Productivity languishes, limiting wage growth potential. Young people face debts and costs their parents never imagined. Older workers discovered retirement security was an illusion. The social contract between work and reward lies broken. When working full-time guarantees poverty, when essential workers need food banks, when young professionals flee to Europe for basic dignity, can we really call this a functioning economy? Or have we created a system that exploits workers to enrich owners, disguised as a free market whilst rigged at every level? Reform becomes essential for preventing permanent decline in British living standards. The only question remaining, will Britain find the courage to change? Or will the last working person to leave please turn off the lights?